My phone lit up at 11:47 at night. One voicemail? I almost ignored it. Then another came, then another. I sat up in bed and watched that number climb 12, 19, 27, 38 until it stopped at 43. 43 voicemails from a family I hadn't spoken to in 7 years. My hands were shaking before I even pressed play. And by the time I reached voicemail number 31, I was standing at my bedroom window in the dark, phone pressed so hard against my ear it hurt, staring at the empty street below like I was looking for something that made sense. Because what I heard on that recording didn't just explain why they were calling. It exposed every single lie my family had built their lives on, and proved that everything they took from me, they had stolen on purpose. If this story feels familiar in any way, stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. My name is Dara. I live in a small house in Columbus, Ohio with my husband Joel and our rescue dog Pepper, who is mostly blind in one eye and completely convinced she runs the entire neighborhood. On most Tuesday nights, I am in bed by 10. I drink chamomile tea when I can't sleep. I keep a small garden out back, tomatoes, basil, one stubborn rosemary bush that refuses to die no matter what I do to it. I am 43 years old, and for the first time in my entire life, I know what it feels like to live without waiting for something bad to happen. That peace took 7 years to build. 7 years of therapy. 7 years of slowly unlearning the habit of making myself small so other people could feel large. 7 years of learning that silence is not abandonment. Sometimes, silence is the only honest thing left to offer a situation that has been built entirely on lies. I had not spoken to my mother Marcine since I was 36 years old. I had not spoken to my brother Theron since the same week. There had been no dramatic final fight, no screaming match at a funeral, no thrown dishes or slammed doors. There was just one conversation, quiet, devastating, and final, and then nothing. I changed my number 3 months later. I moved 2 states away the following spring, and slowly, painfully, I built something that actually belonged to me. Joel knew the whole story. He had held me through enough 2 a.m. breakdowns in our early years together to know every chapter of it by heart. He knew about Marcine's particular brand of cruelty, the kind that never raises its voice, that always has a reasonable explanation, that makes you feel like you are the unstable one for even noticing it. He knew about Theron, charming, effortless Theron, who had spent 30 years being handed everything while I stood 2 feet away, being handed reasons why I didn't deserve it. Joel was asleep beside me that night when my phone lit up the first time. I remember looking at the screen and feeling nothing at first, just mild confusion. The number was one I didn't recognize. I set the phone back down, closed my eyes, then it buzzed again and again. I picked it up and saw a voicemail notification, then 2. Then I watched in real time as the number kept climbing, and something cold moved through my chest. Not fear exactly, something older than fear. Something that lived in my body from a long time ago and had been very, very quiet for 7 years. By the time the notification stopped, Joel had rolled over and put his hand on my arm without even fully waking up. Dara, his voice was thick with sleep. You okay? I didn't answer him right away. I was staring at that number on my screen. 43. I hadn't heard my mother's voice in 7 years, and somewhere in those 43 voicemails, something was waiting for me that I was not ready for. I pressed play. But before I tell you what I heard, I need to tell you who these people actually were. Because if I just say, my mother was cruel and my brother was favored, you might picture something you've seen before. Something familiar. Something you think you already understand. What Marcine did was different. It was quieter than that. And that's what made it so hard to name for so long. Growing up in Dayton, Ohio, we looked like a perfectly normal family from the outside. My father, Raymond, was a soft-spoken man who worked 31 years at the same manufacturing plant and came home every evening smelling like machine oil and coffee. He wasn't a complicated man. He loved his garden. He loved the Cleveland Browns even though they broke his heart every single season, and he loved me in that steady, quiet way that some fathers love their daughters. Not with big speeches or grand gestures, but with small, consistent things. He always saved me the corner piece of whatever my grandmother sent at Christmas. He always asked about my friends by name. He always noticed when something was wrong, even when I hadn't said a word. Marcine noticed too. She just used what she noticed differently. My mother was the kind of woman who could deliver a compliment and a wound in the exact same sentence, and make you feel like you were ungrateful for bleeding. She had a gift for it. This precise, surgical way of making you feel like everything that went wrong in your life was a direct result of some flaw she had been patiently tolerating in you for years. And she did it all with this calm, slightly disappointed expression. Like she expected better from you and wasn't even surprised that you'd failed again. Theron never got that expression. Not once in 36 years did I ever see my mother look at my brother Theron with anything close to disappointment. He was 4 years older than me, effortlessly charming, and he had figured out very early in life that as long as he kept Marcine entertained and validated, he would never have to be accountable for a single thing he did. And he wasn't, ever. When Theron wrecked my father's car at 19, it became a funny story by dinner. When I forgot to call home one weekend during my second year of college, Marcine didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. When Theron borrowed $2,000 from my parents and never paid it back, it was never mentioned again. When I asked for help with 1 month's rent during a genuinely desperate stretch after a job loss, Marcine sat across from me at her kitchen table and said, very carefully, "Dara, I really think this is something you need to figure out on your own. It'll be good for you." I was 28 years old. I had never once asked them for anything before that. I drove home that night and sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building for a long time. Not crying, just sitting with this feeling I couldn't fully name yet. This slow, grinding recognition that the rules in my family did not apply to everyone equally, that they never had, that I had spent my entire life working twice as hard for half as much grace, and nobody in that house was ever going to acknowledge it. I didn't have the word for it then. I didn't call it scapegoating or emotional neglect, or any of the language I would eventually find years later in a therapist's office in Columbus. Back then, I just called it Tuesday. And I kept showing up. For years, I kept showing up, because Raymond was there, and as long as my father was alive, that house still had something in it worth coming back for. Then my father got sick, and everything I thought I knew about my family got so much worse. Raymond was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's in the spring of my 34th year. He told me himself, on the phone, in that same quiet, steady voice he used for everything. Like he was telling me about the weather, like he was trying to protect me from the weight of it even while carrying it himself. I drove to Dayton that same weekend. I sat with him on the back porch, and we didn't talk about the diagnosis much. We just sat. He drank his coffee, I held his hand, and at some point he looked over at me and said, "You turned out real good, Dara. I want you to know I see that." I have replayed that sentence 10,000 times since then. The next 2 years were hard in the way that slow things are hard. Not one giant crash, but a long, grinding erosion. Raymond's hands started shaking first, then his balance, then his speech, which was the one that broke something in me quietly, because my father's voice had always been the steadiest thing I knew. Marcine managed his care with the kind of visible martyrdom that made sure everyone around her understood exactly how much she was sacrificing. She would sigh heavily in doorways. She would make comments about how exhausting it all was, to whoever was standing nearby, never directly to Raymond, because she was too careful for that. Theron visited maybe 4 times in 2 years. Each visit lasted a weekend. Each time he left, Marcine would stand in the driveway waving like he'd just done something heroic. I drove to Dayton every 3 weeks. I took Raymond to his appointments when Marcine said she was too tired. I reorganized his medications after I found 3 weeks' worth sitting unopened on the bathroom counter. I stayed some nights just to make sure someone was there who was actually paying attention. Nobody noticed, or if they did, they didn't say so. Raymond died on a Thursday morning in October. He was 67 years old. I got the call from Marcine at 7 a.m., and I was in my car by 7:15. I don't remember the drive. I just remember arriving and walking into that house, and Theron was already there, which meant Marcine had called him first, which meant she had let some amount of time pass before she called me, and I filed that away in the part of myself that had been quietly collecting evidence for years. The funeral was handled the way Marcine handled everything, with complete control and zero input from me. My suggestions were smiled at and ignored. The song Raymond loved was replaced with something Marcine preferred. The photo I chose for the program was swapped for one where Marcine looked better. Small things, individually meaningless. Together they formed a very clear sentence. Then came the will. Raymond had told me, directly, clearly, more than once, that he intended to leave the house and his savings split equally between Theron and me. He had also told me he wanted me to have his father's watch and his mother's small diamond ring, the one she wore her entire married life. These were not dramatic declarations. They were quiet, specific conversations between a father and his daughter. I believed him completely. What the will said was different. The house went to Theron outright. The savings, nearly $90,000 accumulated over 31 years of factory work, were designated for Theron to manage, quote, for the benefit of the family. I received a single line, a small jewelry box containing 2 pairs of earrings I had never seen before in my life. No watch, no ring. I looked up from that document, and I looked at Marcine. She was already looking at me. And she had that expression, that calm, slightly disappointed expression, like she was waiting to see if I was going to embarrass myself. I didn't say a word that day, but 3 weeks later, I called her, and I said everything. That phone call lasted 11 minutes. I know because I looked at my screen when it ended, and the timer was still running. 11 minutes to say everything I had swallowed for 36 years. I had rehearsed none of it. I hadn't planned to call that morning. I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when something just shifted inside me, like a door that had been leaning against its frame for years, finally fell off its hinges. I told Marcine exactly what I thought of the will. I told her I knew Raymond hadn't written it that way on his own. I told her I knew about the earrings, that they were a deliberate substitution, a calculated insult dressed up as inheritance. I told her I remembered every appointment I drove Raymond to while Theron was busy living his life unbothered. I told her I remembered the rent conversation when I was 28. I told her I remembered all of it. Every sideways comment, every missing invitation, every room I walked into and felt the temperature drop 2 degrees because I was the wrong child. Marcine let me finish. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, in that perfectly measured voice, "Dara, I think the grief is making you say things you're going to regret." That was it. That was her entire response. I hung up. I blocked her number. I blocked Theron. I blocked every aunt, every cousin, every family friend whose number I had saved. I packed a bag that same afternoon, drove to Joel's apartment, we had been together 2 years by then, and I sat on his couch and told him everything from the beginning. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't tell me to reconsider. He just listened, and when I was done, he said, "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." I went no contact the next morning. Completely. Permanently. Or so I thought. So now you understand what that silence cost me. And what it gave me back. 7 years is a long time. Long enough to grieve a living family. Long enough to stop dreaming about them. Long enough to build something so solid and real that you almost forget what it felt like to live inside all that confusion and pain. Joel and I got married in a small outdoor ceremony in the fall. 23 people, fairy lights in the trees, Pepper wearing a little bandana that she hated. It was the happiest day of my life, and not one person from my family of origin was there, and I did not cry about that even once. I had Bev, though, my father's younger sister, Aunt Bev, sharp-tongued, silver-haired, the kind of woman who says exactly what she means and means every word of it. She had always been quietly in my corner. She hadn't agreed with my no-contact decision, not at first. She was old-fashioned about family, about keeping doors open. But she respected it. We exchanged cards at Christmas, occasional calls on birthdays. She never pressured me, never carried messages back and forth from Marcine. She was just there, steadily, honestly there. So when I stood at my bedroom window that night scrolling through 43 voicemails, I recognized Bev's number immediately among the others. She had called 6 times. The first 30 voicemails were from numbers I didn't recognize. Cousins, probably, or Theron calling from different phones. I could tell by the area codes. I didn't listen to those yet. I went straight to Bev's first voicemail and pressed play. Her voice came through shaking in a way I had never heard from her before. Bev didn't shake. Bev was the woman who had once told a hospital administrator exactly where to put his clipboard without raising her voice. Hearing her sound like this stopped my breath cold. "Dara." A long pause. "Dara, honey, I need you to listen to every single word I'm about to say. Something has come out, something about your daddy's estate, and I need you to know, I need you to hear this from me first. What they did to you was not an accident." My hand dropped from the window glass. Outside, the street was completely still. Not a single car, not a single light. Just silence and darkness and my own reflection staring back at me from the cold glass. I pressed play on her second voicemail. Bev's second voicemail was longer, Her voice had steadied slightly, but there was something underneath it. A controlled fury, the kind that lives in a person who has been sitting on information for too long and finally cannot hold it anymore. She said that 3 weeks ago, she had been helping clear out her own house, downsizing, getting rid of decades of accumulated things, when she found a box in her storage closet that Raymond had left with her years before he got sick. He had asked her to hold it, told her it was important documents, personal things, nothing urgent. Bev, being Bev, had respected his privacy and never opened it. She had simply stored it and forgotten about it the way you forget about things that aren't on fire yet. When she finally opened that box, she found two things that made her sit down on her closet floor and not get up for a very long time. The first was a handwritten letter from Raymond, dated 14 months before he died. In it, he described his actual wishes for his estate in clear, specific detail. The house split equally between Theron and me, the savings divided the same way, and his mother's ring left specifically to me. He had written my name, underlined it. There was nothing ambiguous about it. It was not the official will. It was a personal letter, but it was Raymond in his own handwriting, and every word of it was the exact opposite of what that will had said. The second thing in that box was worse. It was a document, a formal amendment to Raymond's original will, dated 8 months before he died, during a period when his Parkinson's had progressed enough that his hands shook badly and his speech had started slurring. The amendment redirected the house solely to Theron and restructured the savings under Theron's sole management. At the bottom of that amendment was Raymond's signature. Except it wasn't Raymond's signature. Bev knew her brother's handwriting the way you know a song you grew up with. She had 40 years of birthday cards, Christmas notes, and letters to compare it to. The signature on that amendment was wrong. The pressure was wrong. The slant was wrong. The way Raymond always looped the Y in his last name, always, without exception for his entire life, was not there. Someone had signed Raymond's name on a legal document changing his will, and that someone had made sure I walked away from my father's estate with a jewelry box full of earrings that weren't even mine. I was no longer standing at the window. At some point during Bev's voicemail, I had backed up until I hit the wall, and I was just leaning against it, phone at my ear, the darkness of the bedroom pressing in around me. Joel was still asleep. I could hear him breathing. That sound, that ordinary, peaceful sound, was the only thing keeping me connected to the life I had built. Bev's third voicemail was short. I've already made copies of everything. The letter, the amendment, all of it. I have them somewhere safe. I didn't know what to do at first. I'm an old woman, Dara. I don't know about lawyers and fraud and all of that. But I knew I had to tell you. I knew I had to call. I'm sorry it took me this long to open that box. I am so sorry, honey. Her voice broke on that last word. Just slightly. Just enough. I pressed play on her fourth voicemail. She had done one more thing before calling me. Something I hadn't expected. Something that meant this was no longer just a family secret sitting in an old woman's closet. Bev had already called a lawyer. I stood in that dark bedroom for a long time after Bev's fourth voicemail ended. Long enough that the screen went black in my hand. Long enough that the street outside went from completely still to the first faint suggestion of early morning, that particular shade of dark blue that shows up maybe an hour before actual dawn, when the world hasn't decided yet whether it's still night or already the beginning of something new. I felt that exact same way. Joel woke up at some point and found me standing there. He didn't say anything dramatic. He just got up, came to stand beside me, and waited. That's the thing about Joel that I still cannot fully explain to people. He has this quality of just being present without requiring anything from the moment. He looked at my face and knew it was serious. He put his hand on my back and said nothing. I turned and looked at him in the dark. Theron forged my father's signature, I said. On the will amendment, Bev found proof. Joel was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Okay, he said. What do you need? Not, are you sure? Not, maybe there's an explanation. Not, let's not jump to conclusions. Just, what do you need? I have loved that man for 11 years, and in that moment I felt it down to the bottom of my feet. I needed to think, so I did what I always do when something is too large to process standing up. I made tea. We went to the kitchen together, and I sat at the table while Joel put the kettle on, and I laid out everything Bev had told me in order. Slowly, like I was arranging evidence on a table. Which, as it turned out, was exactly what I was doing. By the time the tea was ready, I had already decided three things. First, I was not going to listen to the remaining voicemails from those unknown numbers. Not yet. Whatever Theron or Marcine or any cousin had to say could wait. Their panic was not my emergency. Second, I was going to call Bev in the morning, the moment it was a reasonable hour, and I was going to get the name of the lawyer she had already contacted. Bev said she'd made copies of everything and stored them somewhere safe. I needed to know exactly what documentation existed and what shape it was in. Third, before I did anything else, before any lawyer, before any conversation, before any decision, I was going to send Marcine one text message, not a confrontation, not a question, not an accusation she could dodge or reframe or file away under Dara being unstable again. Just 5 words that would tell her, precisely and without any ambiguity, that the silence was over, and not in the way she had hoped. I picked up my phone. I opened a new message to Marcine's number, which I still had saved under Do Not Answer in my contacts because I am apparently a woman who plans ahead even in grief. I typed slowly, deliberately. The way you write something you want to mean exactly what it says, and nothing more and nothing less. I know what Theron did. 5 words. Send. I set the phone face down on the table. Joel slid a mug toward me. I wrapped both hands around it. Outside the kitchen window, the sky had shifted. Still dark, but differently dark now, that pre-dawn blue deepening at the edges into something that looked almost like it was building toward light. My phone buzzed within 4 minutes. I didn't pick it up. I finished my tea first. Marcine's reply sat face down on that table for 22 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the microwave the entire time. Not out of anxiety, not out of fear, but out of something I had never felt in relation to my mother before. Control. Complete, quiet, unshakable control. For the first time in my entire life, I was not rushing to manage her feelings or brace for her reaction or recalculate my own words based on what she might say back. I had sent 5 words, and I was drinking my tea, and she could wait. When I finally turned the phone over, her message was 3 lines long. I don't know what lies Beverly has been filling your head with. Your father's wishes were clear. Please don't do something you can't take back. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down again and almost laughed. Not from amusement, but from recognition. Even now, even caught, even with the ground actively dissolving beneath her feet, Marcine's first instinct was to reframe the truth as someone else's manipulation, to position herself as the reasonable one, to place the warning, "Don't do something you can't take back," on me, as though I was the one who had done something irreversible in that attorney's office 8 months before Raymond died. I didn't reply. I called Bev at 7:30 that morning. She answered on the first ring, which told me she hadn't slept either. We talked for 40 minutes. She gave me the name of the attorney she had contacted, a woman named Patricia Hale, who specialized in estate litigation and had already reviewed the documents Bev sent over. Patricia had used the word fraud within the first 10 minutes of their conversation. She had used the word forgery. She had told Bev that the variance in the signature alone was significant, and that combined with Raymond's documented medical condition at the time of the amendment, the advanced tremor, the compromised motor function, the timeline created serious legal questions that a court would want answered. Bev had also found something else in Raymond's box that she hadn't mentioned in the voicemails. A photograph. Raymond and Bev together, maybe 20 years ago, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. On the back, in Raymond's unmistakable handwriting, that looped E, that careful pressure, he had written, "For Dara, when she needs to remember I was always proud of her." Bev mailed it to me. It arrived 4 days later. I held it for a long time before I could put it down. The legal process was not fast, and it was not clean, and it was not the dramatic courtroom confrontation that part of me, the 36-year-old part, the one who stood in Marcine's living room holding a jewelry box full of strangers' earrings, might have once wanted. It was paperwork and depositions and months of careful, methodical documentation. Theron retained an attorney. Marcine gave a deposition in which she claimed no knowledge of the amendment's origins, which Patricia described to me afterward, with a very specific expression that said everything without saying anything. In the end, a settlement was reached. The details are not something I discuss publicly. What I will say is that Raymond's actual wishes, the ones written in his own hand in that letter Bev found, were finally honored. What belonged to me came back to me. Not all of it. Not the years, not the grief, Not the version of my father's final chapter that should have been quieter and more dignified than it was. But the ring came back. My grandmother's ring, the one she wore her entire married life, it came back. I wear it on my right hand, not as a wound, not as a reminder of what was taken. I wear it because Raymond wanted me to have it. And Raymond was right about me, and I am done letting other people's smallness define what I deserve. I never responded to any of those 43 voicemails. I never went back to no contact either. Not with Bev. We talk every Sunday now, usually in the evening, usually longer than either of us plans. She laughs the same way Raymond did. Sometimes mid-conversation I catch it, and I have to stop for just a second and let it land. Some things get taken from you. Some things find their way back. And some things, the ones that were always truly yours, nobody can forge a signature over. Not really. Not permanently. Raymond knew that. He planned for it. He always did notice when something was wrong, even when I hadn't said a word.